Bay is incredibly overloaded with nutrients, and you get algal blooms in the summer that kill all the wildlife in the water, except the ones that can survive under very toxic conditions. So you remember when Stephen Chu, the current DOE secretary, took office, about 6 weeks after he took office, he said, and he comes from Berkeley, California, by the way, so he should know a lot about this. He said, in 100 years from now, California will not be able to grow anything. That's a remarkable statement for somebody who's very conservative. His training is in physics. He's got a Nobel Prize.
Mm-hmm.
And then the first thing he talks about is the demise of modern agriculture in a state that produces, I'd say 60% of the vegetables and fruits that end up on your plate come from the Salinas area of California. So they're in huge, huge difficulties right now. It's all about water.
It is all about water. And not only does it kill the ecosystem, but if it gets into the ecosystem and it's still sold to the population.
Oh, well.
I mean, who knows what the potentiality
Sure.
of disease is to come in the future. No one really has an idea of the ramification that one can do. I mean, I know that you perceive that taking care of the problem now would be more financially sound than having to take care of the issue in the future, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's a remarkable program that was on public television with Bill Moyers, who's one of my all-time heroes. You might want to get him on your show also, by the way. He would be a terrific guest for you. He had a program about maybe 15 years ago called In Our Children's Food. And that program went to the Salinas area of California, which is on the Monterey Peninsula, where a lot of the food is grown. And he was talking with a woman, a Latino, who showed him all of the houses in her community in which there was some tragic event. Spina bifida, for instance, which is a genetic teratogen. I'm not saying that correctly. It's a disease which is created by altering the genes in your body as you start to develop as a fetus. And it can be altered by contaminants from the outside. So spina bifida is, and she showed how many houses actually were affected by this, how many leukemias there were in childhood, how many cleft palates. And he started to add all this up, and she color-coded each house in a different color to show you the different diseases that arose. And then she said, all of our drinking water comes from the ground. And they were sitting over a former pesticide manufacturing site. And they had discarded all their wastes into the aquifer. And, of course, when you drill down into the aquifer and get your water back, this is what you can expect to happen. And he just turned to the camera and said, the companies that are responsible for this said that they were aware of the problem and that more research is needed to rectify this problem. I think the first thing that had to be done was to stop drinking that water and sue the hell out of that company to cover the medical costs for all the problems they created. And, of course, none of that happened. But you can actually access that program on an archive of the public television station. I think it was in a Frontline report some 15 years ago. Well worth looking at, because it really points up all the problems of modern agriculture and living in an era where all of these agrochemicals are starting to accumulate at alarming rates.
Indeed, and it is, my perception that there is no coincidence that if you look at my mother's generation and the generation before hers and my grandmother's generation, there were certain diseases that were existent, but they were not prevalently lucid. In this day and age, it seems like every child, not every child, but a very high percentage, has attention deficit. They have these high blood pressure issues. They have these genetic issues. They're born into the world with all of these rare, strange cancers, but no one seems to be no one is really connecting the dots. I mean, from a secular level, it's almost as if the pesticides and the things that they actually put in food has us in a chemical addictive state, if you will, that blinds us to what's really going on, and I find that quite profound.
Yeah, well, I totally agree. I mean, I spent 38 years, like you said, at a School of Public Health at a fairly high-end university and in the Environmental Health Department, and we had many experts on many of the issues that you were just mentioning, and it's very, very difficult to trace the origin of these diseases back to an outbreak site and say for sure that's where it happened so that you can actually address the cause of it. You can see the results, but it's very difficult to go back and find out actually who was responsible for that particular incidence. And they call it clustering for breast cancers or for stomach cancers or for any other kinds of these teratogenic effects, I should say, of chemical exposures. You can pull your hair out trying to find the actual source of all of this. And believe me, we spend a lot of time looking at data and maps and questionnaires and follow-up studies and talking to physicians and everything else. And it's extremely difficult. And I think that's what gives encouragement to those industries to continue to do what they're doing, because they know it's so difficult for anyone to trace it back to what they're doing.
Absolutely, indeed. It can be very difficult. It's almost the adage, if you will, the notion my grandmother used to say, there's truth hidden in plain sight.
Yeah.
But sometimes acceptance, if you will, of truth can be very hard to deal with.
Oh, yeah.
And, going back to the cognitive dissonance, I think that what would really get secular society into this whole beautiful, progressive idea of vertical farming is if people are really slapped in the face. And, I realize this because I live in New York as well. When we had this so-called hurricane burrowing towards us, and I went to the grocery stores and people were literally fighting over food. I was like, wow, this is like really interesting. So it takes an extreme experience, if you will, for people to realize the food shortages that are to come in the future. And family, I just want to give a quote. By 2030, the population will be pushing towards 9 million people, which will force us to produce 50% more, family, of food that we're producing now.
Right.
50%. That is like huge. So we really have to find alternative ways to be able to feed ourselves, which will barrel into having better health, better self-sustainability, and also, Professor, being able to monitor the system itself, because I think in commercial farming that because it's so huge, you can't monitor everything. Look at all these food outbreaks of salmonella and all of these, all of these things.
Yep. No, there's a huge problem there, and the United States Department of Agriculture acknowledges it and says that we can't inspect virtually every tomato you eat and every green bean that's sold. You have to do spot checks, and of course you're going to miss a lot of specifics if you do that. This latest outbreak with cantaloupes was the one that which really I thought was a horrible consequence of I guess careless behavior on the part of the farms out in Colorado, but there's no way to predict something like this. It's just bad luck on their part. But can you imagine what it would be like to sit down for a Sunday breakfast and you've got your ham and you've got your eggs and you've got your coffee and you've got your slice of cantaloupe and you eat everything, and the next thing you know, a week later and you're dead.
Very profound.
I mean, that 21 people did that. And, you eat your food as though it's perfectly safe and nothing's going to happen. In fact, something good is going to happen. You're not going to feel so hungry afterwards, and you might actually have eaten something that's worthwhile eating to begin with. So you expect this to have a positive effect, and in fact, it turns out to have just the opposite. So it's very frustrating at the governmental level. I know the EPA is doing all they can, but they can't do enough because there aren't enough of them. And other government agencies also. I don't fault them all. I don't, throw darts at everybody, because I think if you get to know those people, you realize that they're under a lot of constraints also. And I'm not defending policy. I'm just defending the people that actually carry out the policies now. So it's frustrating at every single level, except from the things that you yourself can control. And so that's why I think you're probably interested to hear more about this concept, because vertical farming isn't just about gigantic buildings with lots of food produced on a factory or an industrial scale. You can actually scale this down to individuals or to apartment complexes where the apartment itself is in control. Let's say the co-op or whoever owns that group, if they were to form a consortium of people, they could actually have one of these things built and put up on their roofs, and they could enjoy fresh fruits and vegetables all year long and recycle their gray water so that they didn't have to increase their water bills, and use clever uses of passive energy like solar power and wind power, that sort of thing to make it feasible to actually do this. And so there are groups of people in New York City that are actually available for consultation on this, and we can go into that later on if you'd like, because I've got a nice list of people that are on this same wavelength that we are on and want to see this used and done as much as they can to get people interested and used to eating things that they can trust.
Absolutely, and that's very key to our health, not just in the now, but in the future. Mm-hmm. And another thing that I'm really concerned about also, because in my family we're herbologists, deal in herbs. And it seems that in the commercial farming genre, you have these genetically modified seeds that are very, the plants, they're very pervasive in their environments. And I'm wondering, through your research, if you've seen the ecosystem in regions that completely are gone due to the pervasiveness of commercial farming.
Well, I can speak to other issues too, but I just farming in general, I know this seems almost an impossibility to imagine, but since there are now 7 billion of us on this planet, we use the size of South America to farm. So when you think about how big South America is and how much land that represents, and then for 7 billion people it takes that much land to feed them, you can imagine what used to be where farming is now. So forget about whether it's genetically modified or not for the moment. Just take deforestation as one of the biggest offenses against the natural world that we've ever conspired to purport. So, the legend of Paul Bunyan, he comes into Michigan and levels every tree and he ends up a hero. I can't understand the logic of that one at all. Because Paul Bunyan is not my hero, by the way. The Lorax is my hero. That's who I if I have a god, it's based in Dr. Seussisms. I used to actually read the Lorax to third graders, so if you ask me who I really enjoyed teaching to the most, it's third and sixth grade kids, because they'll believe everything you tell them, so you better make sure you're telling them something that's true, because when they grow up, they're going to remember that, and if it wasn't true, they will hate you for the rest of their lives. So I used to use the Lorax as a way of getting involved in discussing problems of the environment, and the genetic modification, if you want to get into that subject, we can for a minute, but I'm just upset over the fact that we agree to sacrifice a lot of the natural world in favor of farming, which of course ends up hurting us to begin with, because we're so connected to the natural world that we only find out that we are after we've disturbed it. So it's too late almost to do something about that. But actually the natural world would come back if we just went away, if we just left it alone. So we have examples of that where it's encouraging to see if we could farm in a different way and just leave that farmland alone, it would return to the thing it used to be before we actually got there. So let's take the entire Midwest, for instance. That used to be a hardwood forest. Hardwood forest is good for the atmosphere because it sucks up carbon dioxide and keeps the temperature balanced, and lots of other good things happen. It filters the air, it prevents floods, provides habitat for all kinds of wildlife. And if you're an herbalist, where are you going to get your herbs from? It's going to come from nature, right? Everything comes from nature, including us. But we seem to have been moving in the opposite direction ever since we could. We headed towards this technology-driven world that we've come up with, and it's looked at as a substitute for the real world that we emerged from to begin with. So I think that if we were to use our technology to then recover our sensibilities and to live within our means and still live well, that's the point. You have to live within your means and you still have to live well, and we can do both of those things now because we know how. Then the natural world would tip their hats to us and the Lorax would go back to business. taking care of those animals that we got rid of. So all the crops that we're eating now, okay, the corn and the soybeans and rutabaga